Free, free, free.
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 Free. Free, free, free.
Free.
Free. Free, free, free.
Oh,
Free, 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 free.
Free.
Free, free,
Free.
free. Free, free. Free, free, free.
Free. Free.
Free.
Free.
Free, free, free. Free. Free, free. Free.
Free. Free. Free.
Free. Free, free.
All right, we're going to start by talking about church etiquette for a minute. It actually sets up where this message is going, and so I'm going to start here. For instance, how should we greet each other in the church? How are we supposed to do that? A lot of you know a woman named Emily Post, kind of wrote the Bible on etiquette. She has extensive advice for greeting people. She wrote this originally in 1922. For example, you may not have known this, according to Emily Post, a gentleman should never initiate shaking hands with a lady. But should he do that, Emily Post wrote, no lady would refuse to shake any hand of an honorable person, not even the hand of a coal heaver at the risk of her fresh white gloves. So if you're a coal heaver here today, you picked the right Sunday to be here. I hope you feel welcome. Emily Post had rules about greeting people in church as well. She said, people do not greet each other at church except at a wedding. Hello should not be said on this occasion in church because it's too familiar. I think we ought to throw out that rule. What do you think? Because we want this place to be a place where everyone feels welcome. And that means we have to figure out some etiquette issues for decisions that didn't exist in 1922. For example, sometimes people have their cell phone on ring mode during a church service. How do we feel about that? Yeah, it's not good etiquette, right? Emily Post would not approve of that if she were writing this book in 2019. Or in some churches, a guest will ask a longtime attendee for directions to somewhere like the kids ministry, and the long-timer will just kind of point and say, it's over there. How do we feel about that? It's not good etiquette, like at least not here. We say, we're gonna walk you over and show you where the kids ministry is. I'll take you over there myself. Or sometimes during worship or during a sermon, I'm told people will actually be checking social media. How do we feel about that? That's not a good idea. It kind of violates our etiquette, right? And the reason I bring this up is because one day Jesus decided to introduce a whole new etiquette to worship in his day. And this one teaching turned people's worlds upside down, and it still does. It actually got incorporated into the 12 steps, and it's going to challenge us today. For some people here today, it's going to lead to conversations that will be difficult, but unbelievably liberating. This is from the Sermon on the Mount in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus is teaching. Let's say you've come to worship God and you have a gift to bring him, and you approach the altar. So this is a holy moment. This is super important. But while you're doing that, you happen to remember there's a relationship in your life that's kind of broken. You've said something or you've done something to another person and it's not resolved. What should you do? Now, rabbis in Jesus' day, they would have debates about this. They would debate if you've begun one duty, like when is it ever right to interrupt that to do something else? They said the only time is if a higher and more important duty that you've been neglecting is the duty that you need to go do. Of course, worshiping God was incredibly important. And so we would expect Jesus to say, if that happens to you, like first complete your act of devotion to God and then go reconcile to that person because God is more important than any human being. But Jesus doesn't say that. In fact, he says the opposite. He says, I want you to interrupt your worship. Like, I want you to leave your gift. I want you to leave the altar. I want you to leave the church, get out of there, and go deal with that relationship. Jesus says, for God, people come first. For God, relationships, treating people right, actually comes first. That's how important it is. In other words, if I knowingly allow an unreconciled relationship to just kind of linger, I indulge it, if there's amends that I could have made but I haven't made them, then, and I go to church and I sing songs and I read the Bible and I give gifts and I worship while I'm blowing off someone that I've damaged, I'm not pleasing God. I'm actually dishonoring God. You know, this made me wonder when I thought about this passage, when Jesus was teaching this, because he was dead serious about this, I wonder if people got up and left while he was talking. Like, I wonder while Jesus was teaching if some people said, man, I have a brother and things are not right between me and him. Like, I need to go talk to him. There's someone I've cheated. I need to go make things right. There's someone I have anger problems toward, and like, I have to go apologize. I bet that happened. And I bet when it happened, Jesus didn't say, hey, where are you going? I'm talking. I bet he said, way to go. Like, go reconcile. Don't just be hearers of the word, but like, go be doers. By the way, right now, during this message, I'm really serious about this because we're about doing what Jesus said. If you feel that nudge from the Holy Spirit, if God brings a memory to your mind, if you get a little convicted and you think, like, I've done something or I've said something or I've wronged someone, then go do what Jesus said. Like, get up and leave this room and go obey Jesus' command. Walk out during this teaching. It's okay. In fact, if that happens and our hearts are right, like, everyone around you should cheer you on because no one here is perfect. Like, when it comes to broken relationships and hurting people, that's me. Like, we've all done that. Well, we're in this series called Free, and we've been learning from the 12 steps, which actually are acquired from the Bible, primarily from the life and teachings of Jesus, and we've been walking through them 1 week at a time. We admit our lives are unmanageable. My ego and my sin are out of control, that we come to believe a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, and then we let go and surrender our lives and our wills to the care and control of Jesus, and then a fearless and honest examination of my faults. That was kind of scary, huh? And it didn't just stop there, but actually confess those faults to God and to myself and to someone I trust, and that took courage, the exact nature of our wrongs. And hopefully you've done that. Hopefully you took a pen, you took a notebook, you did some self-exploratory surgery. If you haven't done that yet, I would say don't procrastinate on this. This is a crucial step toward walking free. And I want to say, if you have done that, and you are doing that, way to go. Like, this is the way of Jesus. This is the life that Jesus wants us to live. And today is built on that foundation, just kind of one step at a time. But I have to tell you, the step that we're talking about today really is a powerful step. And it combines a couple of the 12 steps. And the number of stories that I've heard in recent weeks about addictions and hurts and brokenness, in every one of those stories, almost without exception, points to some kind of relational breakdown. The truth is, people have hurt us, and we have hurt other people. And God says, if you really want to walk free, you have to make those things right. And that's what this step is about. It's about making amends, repairing the damage that has been done to us and repairing the damage that we've caused to other people. And so here's the step. Evaluate all my relationships. Offer forgiveness to those who have hurt me and make amends for harm I've done to others. This is a tough one. And to speak personally, before we started this series, like, I've done all these other steps, not perfectly by a long shot, but real intentionally, but I've never done this step. I've done it on a case-by-case basis as it occurred to me, but never like systematically, comprehensively done this step. And I'll just tell you, this step takes a long time. This one is really hard. I hate this one, and I love this one. I've started it, I'm committed to it, I'm accountable to a friend in my life for it, but it's gonna take a while to do this one. As I said, like all the steps, we draw this from the Bible, especially from the life and teachings of Jesus. And so in the time that we have left in this message, I'm gonna look at one person who Jesus completely transformed. His name is Zacchaeus. He got this step of making amends completely dialed in his life. And this story of Zacchaeus is loaded with all kinds of dynamics that make this amends step really difficult, but also really freeing. And so I want to walk through this story, look at Zacchaeus making amends, and then it's going to be my turn, then it's going to be your turn. This is from Luke chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And this detail will come back later. Luke deliberately tells us that Jesus is just passing through. In other words, he's not going to stay in Jericho, which means there's going to be a lot of people in this town that are disappointed. Because in ancient times, when a famous rabbi comes to town, he was like a big celebrity, like people would get really excited. In our day, when a big celebrity comes to the Bay Area, we don't really get excited, especially if it means there's going to be more traffic, right? Like people just get ticked off because they have better things to do. But in the ancient world, people didn't have better things to do. There was nothing else for them to do. They didn't have Netflix. Like they didn't have Pilates classes. They didn't have March Madness. There was nothing to do. And so when a big rabbi would come into town like Jesus, he would draw huge crowds and he would heal their sick. He would feed their hungry. He would bless little children. And a town like Jericho would carefully select a person who was going to host a visiting rabbi. And they would have motels back then, and so they would choose someone who would reflect honor on their village. But then Jesus comes, and they found out that he's not going to stay. He's not going to heal their sick. He's not going to bless their children. He's not going to feed their hungry. And they feel a little disrespected by that. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Honestly, tax collectors probably have never been loved in any country. Mark Twain asked one time, what's the difference between a taxidermist and a tax collector? Have you heard this? The taxidermist takes only your skin. That's what Mark Twain said. In ancient Israel, tax collectors were particularly despised. And the way this works, and some of you remember that Scott talked about this last week. By the way, didn't Scott do an exceptional job last week? Yeah. He is a great addition to our pastoral team. Well, the way you got a franchise to be a tax collector for a particular region was you would bid out a contract with the government to pay a certain amount of money for that region, and the highest bidder would actually get the contract. And then whatever you could collect over the amount that you had to pay to the government, that's what you would keep. And so it's a system that reinforced corruption. And tax collectors were notoriously dishonest. This is true, and I'm not making this up. One village actually built a statue to honor an honest tax collector, because that's how rare they were. Worse, the taxes didn't go to pay the government of Israel, it went to pay the government of Rome. Rome was oppressing Israel, and so tax collectors were viewed not only as corrupt, but they were viewed as traitors. They were traitors to God, and they were traitors to Israel. And some rabbis actually taught that you were allowed to lie to a tax collector, that it was actually okay to God, that was okay with God if you lied to a tax collector. In case you're wondering about that, that's not in the Bible, so don't try that at home. But some rabbis taught that in Jesus' day. Tax collectors were regarded as unclean, so you couldn't touch a tax collector without being considered unclean. You couldn't go into their home, you couldn't eat a meal with them, or else you would take on their uncleanness. Etiquette was very clear in this. This is why in the New Testament you constantly see two different categories of people associated with each other. Like the Pharisees said to Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Or Luke 15 says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus." Why always these two categories? Of course, Israel knew everyone sinned, but sinner was kind of a technical word to describe people who deliberately and flagrantly violated God's law. In some places, it got even more specific. Jesus was teaching one time to religious leaders, and he said, "The tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you." Like, how dicey do you think it got in that moment? I mean, Jesus had enormous courage. Well, Zacchaeus is a tax collector, and he's not just a tax collector, but he's the chief tax collector. That means he's wealthy. That means he has a lot of minions working under him. That means people hated him. That means people wished that he would die. But he wanted to see Jesus. Now, why would he, a tax collector, want to see Jesus? He's heard these strange stories about this Jesus having kind of a soft spot for tax collectors. Like Jesus would eat with tax collectors. Jesus would hang out with tax collectors. He would actually go to parties with tax collectors. One of his followers was a tax collector. It's like Jesus wore a t-shirt that said, "I love tax collectors." Zacchaeus, who is a tax collector, decides that he wants to see this rabbi, but Zacchaeus is vertically challenged. He knows if he's in a crowd, he can't see over the people, and the people are not going to make way for him. And so Luke says that he runs ahead of the crowd, which is actually a little undignified for a wealthy, powerful man in ancient Near Eastern culture. He climbs up a tree, which is a lot undignified for a wealthy, powerful guy. Luke tells us it's a sycamore fig tree, and I think he tells us this for a few reasons. For one thing, they had low branches, so it'd be easy for a short guy to climb up. For another thing, they had big leaves, so it'd be handy for an unliked guy in that culture to hide. But then also there was an instruction in what was called the Mishnah, the ancient instructions, that said a sycamore tree had to be grown 50 cubits outside of a village. So the idea here is Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus without anyone seeing him seeing Jesus. So he goes outside the village to this tree, climbs up it, but there's no luck. Jesus gets to the tree. The crowd is still with Jesus. And Jesus actually calls Zacchaeus by name. So the question is, how does Jesus know Zacchaeus' name? Like, he's not from Jericho. It could be miraculous knowledge. Ken Bailey says the most likely scenario is the crowd follows with Jesus out of town, and someone in the crowd sees Zacchaeus in the tree. And now this is a humiliating moment for Zacchaeus. And this is the crowd's chance. People can't insult Zacchaeus to his face because he would just tax them to death. But from a crowd, anonymously, they could just let him have it. And so they do. And Zacchaeus is humiliated. They're just taunting him. And Jesus sees what's going on, and he opens his mouth to speak. And this is an amazing moment. The crowd waits, and they know what Jesus is going to say because he's a prophet. He's going to say, "Zacchaeus, you've betrayed God. You've betrayed these people. You need to clean up your act. You need to repent. You need to straighten up your life. There's no place in Jericho for someone like you, Zacchaeus." And there would have been this massive applause for a speech like that. Well, Jesus doesn't make a speech like that. Jesus reached that spot. He looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. And this is probably the first time Zacchaeus experienced true joy in a long time. But no one watching was feeling any joy at all. When I was a kid, we used to sing a song in Sunday school. I'm sure many of you probably don't remember this, but Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. He climbed up, and some of you know this song. All right. But no one in the crowd is singing about wee little Zacchaeus. What they're saying is, are you kidding me? The worst scum in town, and now Jesus is going to go stay in Jericho at his house? Are you kidding? And all the people saw this, and they began to mutter, "He's gone to be the guest of a sinner?" Jesus is taking the condemnation that had been directed to Zacchaeus on himself. Jesus is saying to this tax collector, to this sinner, to this hated traitor thief, "I want to sit at your table. I want to be a guest in your home. I want to sleep in your guest bed. I want to eat from your chair. I want to put myself in your place." Jesus, the perfect rabbi, is taking the uncleanness of this sinner on himself for the sake of love. This is a little foretaste of the cross. Apparently, they go to Zacchaeus' home. Most likely, they're having dinner in a courtyard area so that people could all gather around and watch, because in those days, dinners at homes of wealthy people were kind of public events. And now Zacchaeus starts to just churn, because he looks and hears Jesus in his home, and Jesus is eating and laughing and blessing and teaching, and he's bringing light into this dark place. But there's this crowd, and this crowd is really ugly, and he sees this crowd rejecting Jesus, who accepted him. And not just that, Zacchaeus sees a widow, and she has no place to live because he took her farm. And he sees a couple of little orphans, and they're beggars on the street because he took their inheritance. And he sees a man who used to have a shop, who used to be a merchant, but Zacchaeus robbed him of it. And that man had a son who was so embittered that he rebelled against Rome, and Rome killed his son. And now he has no business, and now he has no son, and it's Zacchaeus' fault. And now that Jesus is in his home, now that he's met Jesus, everyone looks different. When Jesus comes into your life, people start to look different. And in a very dramatic moment, Zacchaeus rises from the table. And if you've ever been in one of those formal meals where someone stands up to make a little speech, it's a big deal. And everyone stops to hear what this hated traitor thief is going to say. And he said to Jesus, "Look, Lord, here and now, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And this was a moment of stunned silence. And Mrs. Zacchaeus is thinking, "Hey, honey, shouldn't we be talking about this first?" And the crowd just goes wild. Like, man, I thought hearing what Jesus did with Lazarus, raising someone from the dead was something. But an honest tax collector, are you kidding me? This is the best miracle of all. You understand what this means for Jericho. No more shaking down widows, no more robbing little orphans, no more squeezing peasants. Jesus has brought justice to Jericho. When the good news comes to a tax collector, it's good news for everyone. When the gospel comes to a rich guy, it's gospel, it's good news for everyone. Now imagine if Zacchaeus skipped this step. Because sometimes in church we kind of do it this way. Imagine Zacchaeus stood up and said, "I used to be a sinner, but Jesus has forgiven me, and I'm so glad. I'm sure sorry for all the money that I stole. My bad. Of course, I spent it all now, so there's nothing I can do about it now, but fortunately, because of grace, I don't really have to." Grace is not permission to not do what is right. Grace is the power to actually do what is right. And that's part of the journey that we're on with Jesus. And so in the time that we have left, I'm going to walk through 5 steps that we need to take on this journey. And the first step is this: I need to make a list of people that I've wronged. I actually begin to sit down and make a list of people that I've wronged. Imagine what Zacchaeus' list looked like. Do you think it was a long list? It was probably like everyone in Jericho, which would have been really daunting. Zacchaeus actually went public so he would be accountable with his intentions on this, that it wouldn't be just an emotional moment that he had with Jesus. He actually declared his intention to other people. I'm going to set things right with everyone. So who have you wronged? Can you think of people? Do you need me to give you some help jogging your memory? Is there anyone you've not paid back a debt to? Anyone you've stolen from? Anyone you've broken a promise to? Anyone you've made fun of? Anyone you're guilty of over-controlling? Anyone you're harsh with? A wife or a husband, a sister, a brother, a child, a parent, an employee, a friend? Anyone you're hypercritical of? Anyone you've been verbally abusive to? Anyone you've been physically abusive to, or emotionally abusive to, or unfaithful to, or taken for granted, or lied to? Is this enough to get you started, or do you need me to keep going? Who have you wronged? Now, I know this step hurts, but it's a good step, and it will actually lead us to freedom. Step 2 is, what harm have I caused them? It'll help to actually be specific on this one. If you deceive someone, ask the question, what did deceiving her do to her? You need to think through. This is a key part of this step. How does deceiving cause harm? Well, one way it causes harm is by eroding trust in a relationship where trust is critical. So often I might just think, I was deceptive, but I don't think about how I actually harmed the other person. This is a great problem. Like if you deceive me or you steal from me or you gossip about me, I know exactly how you harmed me. But if I deceive you, like I don't think about how I've harmed you. A goofy little story, but it kind of illustrates the point. A mom has a 7-year-old son who's with her baby in the other room, and all of a sudden there's a scream. And the mom says, "What was that?" The 7-year-old says, "The baby pulled my hair. It hurt. I'm mad." And the mom says, "Well, the baby doesn't really know how that hurts, how much that hurts." And a few seconds later, there's another scream. "What was that?" The 7-year-old said, "Well, now the baby knows." A major reason I keep hurting people is I avoid thinking about the harm that I'm doing to them. In this step, I deliberately ask God to help me think about what I normally am not thinking about. Like, what harm have I caused them? For example, maybe Jill from work is on your list. What harm have I caused her? Well, I hurt Jill by some untrue gossip that I started spreading at work. It was because of my own insecurity and my envy of Jill's talent and success. And as a result, I caused other people to question Jill's character, and it created an unhealthy climate to the point where she resigned. And so now when I go back to apologize to Jill, you not only remember what you did and the way that you acted and why, you now actually feel Jill's pain, and you can actually apologize with humility and with deep sincerity. One more example. Maybe your wife is on your list. What harm have I caused her? Well, I blew up again, and I called her a nasty name, and I slammed the door, and I left for a while, and then I slept on the couch. And I did that because my temper is out of control, and I've got a lot of unresolved anger and guilt and bitterness in my life, and it just kind of leaks out onto my family members. And as a result, her self-esteem is shattered, and now she's afraid of me. And so when you get to this step, you can not only acknowledge your part in this, but now you can say you're deeply sorry. And not just because you want your marriage to work out, not because things are just crazy, but because you can feel how deeply you've hurt her. Listen to me, there are people in your life that desperately need to hear from you, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And not because you got caught, but because you hurt them. All right, step 3. Am I willing to make amends? Am I willing? And this is just a private deal between you and God. And God maybe is talking to some of you about this right now. So in every case, with every person, you honestly ask the question, am I willing with this person? Yes, I'm willing. Actually, no, God, I'm not willing with this person. Honesty is what's key. This is from the Hebrew Scriptures, Numbers chapter 5. Any man or woman who wrongs another in any way and so is unfaithful to the Lord is guilty and must confess the sin they've committed. They must make full restitution for the wrong they've done. Add a fifth of the value to it and give it all to the person they have wronged. Now, Zacchaeus goes way beyond this. I will pay back 4 times the amount. You see how in the Bible making amends just kind of flows out of the other steps. I do a fearless, honest examination of my wrongs. I admit to God and to myself and to someone I trust the exact nature of my wrongs. And then I make amends. And this will raise a whole bunch of questions. Like, what if it costs too much? What if the other person doesn't deserve it? What if I'm embarrassed? What if it would damage my reputation? God wouldn't want that. What if my spouse has hurt me way more than I've hurt my spouse? What if I've stolen from work and I might go to jail? You see, this is only for people whose lives have become unmanageable and who have therefore surrendered their lives and their will to the care and control of Christ, so they're not worried about their lives anymore. I mean, if you haven't taken that step, this step is not going to make any sense. This is where you begin to live in the kingdom, where you start to live in the presence and the power and the care and the transforming strength of God. So make a list. How have I harmed them? Am I willing to make amends? And I just want to mention here one step that can be really helpful, and that is talk to a wise friend before making amends. There are some times when you need to not go to that person. For example, maybe there's someone who has physically harmed you, and if you were to go to that person, maybe they would be physically a danger to you, and this wouldn't be good for you. It wouldn't be good for them, and so in that case, you just don't need to go to that person. There may be some exceptions, and it's quite rare probably, but it'd be good to talk to a wise friend to go through this with. All right, and then the fifth step is go to the other person, ask for forgiveness, and offer to make things right. So I confess my action, I confess my wrong heart, I confess my wrong motive. I don't explain, I don't make excuses. I just admit what I did. I don't try to make it sound any better. I don't say, but look what was happening to me, or look what you did to me. I don't blame. I don't say, look at all the other stuff that was going on in my life that caused me to do this. And people wonder, what if the other person doesn't accept my apology? Well, that's not up to you. Your job is to confess and make amends. And you'll be surprised at how often a heart melts. But that's not your job. What if I tried it before and it didn't work? Well, try it again. Relationships are usually not broken overnight, and they're usually not healed overnight either. And so we can't think, man, I tried this one time and it didn't work. I met with the person one time and it didn't work. God didn't work. I told you I made a list. There was a relationship where I'd been judgmental and withdrawing and gossiping, and I realized that it had to stop, and so I made a phone call. And it was a really hard phone call to make, but we talked, and then we had another conversation, and then we met face-to-face for a couple hours. And I talked to this person about what I've done and how it was hurtful. And it's not over yet, but I'm glad I'm on the right path. And Zacchaeus gets on the right path. Here and now, I'm going to give away half of my stuff. I want to make amends to anyone I've cheated. I'm going public about this. And Jesus looks at Zacchaeus, and he didn't say, oh man, Zacchaeus, don't do that. He didn't say, Zacchaeus, that's going to cost you way too much money. He says, today, salvation has come to this house. And I want to tell you, salvation still comes. I heard about a guy this week who got saved out of the Haight-Ashbury district in the 1960s. Anyone know what was going on in Haight-Ashbury in the 1960s? A lot of substance issues going on for this guy. And he got saved, and he got married, and he started a family, and he went to seminary, went into ministry, helped start a church, actually. And then he was at a wedding reception, and someone offered him a glass of champagne, just one glass, and he took it. And then hell. He lost his family, he lost his marriage, he lost his ministry. And I want to say this series is not just for a subset of people called addicts. We are all addicted to sin. And I just keep hearing stories. I know when an addiction like that just kind of gets a grip on you. People try to cope with it, they try to manage it themselves, they try to white knuckle it. Don't do that. They lose marriages. They lose everything and everyone they love. And this guy found the way of Jesus through the 12 steps. And now he says, I hope everyone can learn now what I wish I would have known then. Salvation came to his house. I talked to a woman a couple weeks ago right here on Sunday, and she's not from a religious background at all. She's never believed in God. But a friend who attends Blue Oaks tracked her down to apologize and kind of set something right. And she did that because she's a follower of Jesus, and it intrigued her so much that she's now coming to our church every week to check out a Jesus who would prompt such behavior in another human being. Salvation is going to come to her house. I had a guy tell me, God's led me to make a list of people who I've wronged and to make amends, and I've been writing letters. And I've had people that I've wronged who I hadn't seen for years suddenly show up in my life so that I can take this step. And I've been having conversations that I never thought I would have, and I feel like my heart that was in chains for so many years is just kind of breaking. God is changing me so much I can't even believe it. And now this person wants to get baptized. And by the way, in May, we're going to do baptisms here at Blue Oaks. And if you've never been to a baptism service here at Blue Oaks, you want to be here. You don't want to miss it. Baptism is kind of like the 13th step. There's 12 steps, it's baptism is a way of expressing what Zacchaeus did. I've welcomed Jesus into my house. I've welcomed him into my life, even though I didn't deserve it. And I just want everyone to know. God might be calling you to get baptized. And if he is, I would say, with no shame or embarrassment, just take that step of faith. You can let us know. You can check that box on the next step card if you want to. If you know someone who needs to take this step of baptism, would you just be praying like crazy for them? Because salvation still comes. Jesus still comes. He says to people, you come down. And people come down. And he changes their lives. And the crowd goes wild. It still happens. The only question is, will you do this? Here's what we're going to do now. We're going to end this service quite abruptly and very intentionally today. Normally, after the message, there's a closing song, and then the worship leader will say something that lets everyone know the service is over. We're not going to do that today. We're going to actually end this real abruptly today. I was on a Southwest flight not too long ago, and after the wheels came down, the flight attendant came on and said, "We landed, get out." And it was one of the most memorable exits from a plane that I can remember in a long time. And we're going to end kind of like that today. We're going to end very abruptly, and here's why. Because Jesus said, if you think of someone you know where that relationship is broken, you've done something, you've said something, you've wronged someone in some way, for God's sake, don't blow it off. I don't care how much it costs you. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care if you've done it before. God will go with you. God is in this. People have been doing this ever since Zacchaeus and way before. And for some of you, this is your day. And I'm dead serious about this. Jesus is dead serious about this. There is a power and life on the other side. So get out your cell phone if you need to get out your cell phone. If you need to make a call, make a call. If you need to start writing a list of things that you've done, people that you've wronged, if there's a letter or an email that you need to start drafting, if there's a prayer that you have to pray, God, I'm not willing to do this right now. Help me to be willing. If there's something that you have to do, do it. We don't want to be a church where, people go away and they say, wow, that was a great message, or wow, that wasn't that great of a message. We want to be a church where people say, I want to do what Jesus said. So we landed. Get out.